1934 in the quaint little village of Alpena, a population of about 400. I'm a member of the board of the Alpena Historical Society, which is a young society. We're just getting started. And I've been invited to tell a handful of stories, try to get a little humor in them if I can, knowing that my good friend James Putman is the resident historian, and I understand that he will give a very detailed account of Alpena and the sister community of Carrollton. So for this exercise, I've chosen 4 stories that are true and to me were humorous. I never dreamed that I would be able to share them with anybody. To this point, all I've shared them with are my dad and my sister. But for fear of forgetting one of them, like Rick Perry did, forgetting the 3rd Department of Government he was going to eliminate, I wrote them down and I've put a title to them. The first one is The Devil and Billy Watkins. The second one is The Ass Chewing. The third one is A Testimony. And the fourth one is The Boomerang. So I'll have to set the stage for you a little bit, the context of these stories. I was quite young during these stories. They occurred about 1948 to 1951. So the setting, as I looked around at Alpena and became aware of my surroundings and how provincial I was, it was loaded with churches. And so the people are very devout Christians and a singularistic society. There weren't people of color there. And so many churches and devout believers that sin had been eradicated. We couldn't have dances or play cards or go to a speakeasy. All you could do maybe was hold hands with your girlfriend. So this particular night, probably in July, about this time of the year, this is July the 19th, the Baptist church was having a revival. And to save money, they didn't hire an outside evangelist to come in and present the program. So Reverend Downs decided that, the resident minister decided that he could handle it himself, and he was a very personable and engaging individual. So this hot July night, the windows were open, the bugs were flying inside. The funeral home supplied little fans and everybody was fanning. And over to my left were Billy and Frank Watkins. Jack and Iva had 3 beautiful children, 2 of which were Billy and Frank. Billy was about 5 years old. So the minister got going and was about halfway through his sermon, and everybody was really worked up. The Holy Ghost was certainly present in the group. And I don't know why Reverend Downs did it, but he described Satan in the form of a snake. And as a rhetorical question, he shouted out, "And who likes snakes?" And Billy Watkins, after a little pause, said, "By God, I don't." So the Holy Ghost vanished, and there was a stunned silence. And Reverend Downs did the only thing that he could. He said, "Turn to number 43 in the hymnal, sing it, and Mr. Massengale, you will give the benediction." So that ended the story of the devil and Billy Watkins. The second one is the ass chewing. The setting is the Alpena School, and in 1939, I was 5 years old and was sent to school when I was 5, and it was the beginning of winter, so it was cold. And my dad, Leon, was custodian of the school, and So he would go early, and I would follow, just walk up about 2 blocks to the school. We lived on the corner on Denver Street in Alpena. And I looked up at the school, where the school building was, and the whole horizon was filled with flame. So the school burned in the winter of 1939. So of course it had to be rebuilt. So in the rebuilding process, they went from a rock and frame to sandstone rock, had to excavate mainly by pick and shovel, and a lot of the strong men were there on the platforms. It's a 1-story with a basement, so a pretty high side, and big 2x8s were available for a pathway about a block away. They had to carry the clay and soil away and dump it. And so the people involved were Marion Shorty Graves and Elliot Craig. They're the actors in my story. And Marion was, he was kind of short. Everybody, they were hard-working men, and times were hard. And Shorty smoked. And it was hard for him to keep up with a stronger man pushing that wheelbarrow loaded with soil. So he got slower and slower. And Alec noticed this, Alec Craig, and he figured that the foreman would have something to say. And as I mentioned, the Shorty was particularly poor, and his overalls were ripped and torn, and the crotch well, the threads were out, and there were holes, and his overalls were tattered. And so he got slower and slower, and finally the foreman cornered him, and there was an awful waving of arms and a chewing out. And Alec noticed this, and when Shorty speeded up and came back to load his wheelbarrow, Alec asked him, he said, did you get a scolding? And Shorty said, yes, it was a terrible ass chewing. And Alec said, well, I knew you did because I could see pieces of your ass hanging out. The third story is the testimony. And again, this is in the religious context of Assembly of God Church in Batavia. That's a little town about 6 miles from Alpena. And my dad, Leon, and my sister, Elaine, the 3 of us went to this revival. And the building was full, and the time came for testimonies. So the senior women, one by one, would get up and tell what God had done for them, and they were silver-tongued. They'd practiced thinking about what God had done for them and their families. They'd been just totally blessed. And one woman after another gave a testimony. And it was obvious that the men were being left out, and they didn't want to be left out, but who would go first? So Mr. Shook, he felt the Spirit of God on him, and he jumped up and he realized that he had not prepared anything to say, and he was no match for these silver-tongued women. So he said, hell, fire, and glory. And that was his testimony. He sat back down, and there was a stunned silence. And my dad, he really loved to laugh, and I was almost embarrassed for him. He got down between the pews and was laughing, and Elaine and I began to wonder if we were going to create a disturbance, but we finally got him calmed down. And over the years, we 3 have used that hell, fire, and glory many, many times when unexpected things happened and we didn't know how to handle it. The 4th and last story I call the boomerang. I was about 15, was beginning to date a little bit, and I needed movie and popcorn money, and I was willing to work. My dad and Bo Forney, they were skilled traders, cattle traders. They would buy and sell anything, including real estate. And they carried a lot of money with them. And if they spotted a cow or 3 or 4 cows or pigs or whatever, they would offer to buy them. And they would take on the responsibility of rounding them up, loading them, and taking them to the market. So it became known to them that Roscoe Armour, a very old man who'd been in World War I, who lived on Terrapin Creek about 8 miles away, was willing to get out of the cattle business and sell his entire herd of about 20 animals. And Roscoe lived in a beautiful little farm on Terrapin Creek with the springs and the mountain in the background, just a beautiful setting. And the only thing was he had shorthorn breed. My dad, who could weigh an animal with his mind, he could walk around an animal and he knew within 5 pounds of what it would weigh. So he's highly skilled, as was Bo, but Bo was not quite as good as Leon. So they had to analyze these 20 animals, sum the weights, and they weren't Black Angus or Hereford, which they were accustomed to weighing just using their minds or their eyes. So Roscoe had let things run down, and so they decided that Bernal, I could be their border collie to round up these cattle who were relatively wild. They didn't like to see strangers. So for about a week, we mingled with the cattle some and got them used to going into the cattle lot, repaired the corral some and fed them. And these traders now started to identify a price at which that Mr. Armour would sell the cattle. Mr. Armour, being a good trader himself, he said, I was in World War I and I experienced I was gassed, and he said, I've lost my senses, my sense of hearing, I can barely see, I can't taste, and he went on and on. His 5 senses were just pretty well shot. So they finally settled on a price of, my recollection's not totally accurate, but it's around $9,000. And the border collie helped round them up. They bought the cattle, and I was going to get my movie and popcorn money. Took them to the market, and 2 or 3 days went by, and Saturday was coming up soon, and I wanted my money. So my dad was somewhere else. I couldn't dun him for the money, but I found Bo on the streets of Alpena. And so I done Bo for my money, and there was a look of pain that I'd never seen on him expressed in his countenance. And he said, Bernal, when all was said and done, he said, we cleared $1.79. And quickly I said, I threw the spear at him. I said, Bo, thank God that Mr. Armour had lost all his senses, or I could forget about ever going to the movie and certainly never get to go to the university. So I thought about the wrap-up. I always wanted to express my appreciation to the taxpayers of Alpena and Boone County for providing a good school, the Alpena High School. I graduated in 1951, and I was pushed hard academically. My mother, I always talk about Quintella, my mother, and Millie Jones. Millie and Steve had a son, Claude, who was my age, and these women competed with each other through their sons. So whether it was a piano recital, which I won, or academically, which I did not win, Claude was pushed very, very fast, and became a man of note in Alpena as an attorney. He practiced in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and in Harrison. So academically, I was pushed very hard, and my good friends Francis Collins Dozier and Omel Fields, we three tried very hard, and as a result, I did get to continue my university education, getting a doctor's degree at Purdue University in 1966. But in my mind, during my career, I frequently would go back to the little provincial village of Alpena, absent any sin, but having a good swimming hole on Long Creek. I think of the nice horse that I rode, and the horse and I would jump off the sandbank into the creek. And these good recollections and memories helped sustain me during some very pressured times. So I'll say so long for now.